And this is True Talk on WMNF 88.5 with Samar and Ahmed. Excuse my voice because I am just getting over a cold or something. So Samar and I are here on today's program. We're going to be speaking about the war in Iran and Trump's press conference last night that's sending stock markets, you know, tanking today. And when is this conflict, this war, going to be over? We're going to have an expert on, Iranian American, Persian American professor that will be speaking about that. And then I don't know if we're going to, get to your phone calls, but we'll be right back right after this short break. This is True Talk on WMNF.
أتمنى لو أنساك وأنسى روحي وياك وإن ضاعت يبقى فداك لو تنساني وأنساك وتريني بنسى جفاك واشتاق لعذابي معاك والقى دموعي فاكراك أرجع تاني في لقاك الدنيا تجيني معاك ورضاها يبقى رضاك ساعتها يهون في هواك طول حرماني هواك واتمنى لو انساك وانسى روحي وياك وان ضاعت يبقى فداك لو تنساني وانساك وتريني بنسى جفاك واشتاق لعذابي معاك والقى دموعي فاكراك ارجع تاني في لقاك الدنيا تجيني معاك ورضاها يبقى رضاك وساعتها يهون في هواك طول حرماني ولاقيك مشغول وشاغلني بيك وعنيا تيجي في عينيك وكلامهم يبقى عليك وانت تداري ورايك واصحى من الليل اناديك.
And we're back on True Talk from WMNF, and that was Abdul Halim Hafiz, one of Samar's favorite singers. Samar, did you appreciate the song?
Yes, of course. I love Abdul Halim. Not that I did while I was young, maybe when after he passed away at the very young age of 44, I was in Cairo. We just moved from Saudi Arabia to Cairo, and he passed away. And they announced his passing. He was in London getting treated for liver disease. I was at the school, in the school system in Egypt. In the morning, we stand in lines and then we listen to like the news and some recitation of the Quran and few proverbs and there's some interesting stuff. Then they announced his passing, and young girls started crying and fainting and collapsing. And then the mistress came out on the mic and said, pull yourselves together. This is you can't be doing that. And I think they regretted the fact that they announced his passing, but his funeral was amazing because he used to tell people that he was sick and no one could believe him, but he eventually had bleeding and passed away in England. Very very prolific and very beautiful voice in singing. Lots of black and white movies. Ahmed, I don't know if I know you grew up in the U.S., but I grew up in Cairo also.
What year was that?
In the late 70s.
I was still in Egypt, but I probably was not aware.
No, you were maybe 8 or 9.
No, I was
9?
younger than that in the
Yeah,
70s.
yeah, yeah, because I was younger. Oh my gosh, I was 14, maybe.
Now people are going to calculate your age.
Yeah, yeah.
He died in 1977.
Oh God.
March 30th, 1977 in
We had
London, England.
we had just moved to Egypt a few months ago. Yes, I remember vividly the spot because they were falling on the grounds, and my sister and I didn't understand what is going on. Who died? They just said the singer. Like, why? And then, then I know and I understand, especially now that especially that uh, started watching the movies.
Um,
How are you feeling? I hope it's not COVID, ya Ahmed.
I hope so too. I mean, I'm feeling better. I
Because
guess it lasted about 4 or 5 days. I think something's going around, and we had our Eid holiday
yeah,
on not last Friday, but the Friday before that. And then, there was weekend activities around Eid and stuff. And right after that, I got sick. I started feeling sick the Monday. So some people are maybe because all the gatherings are on Eid time, meeting a lot of people, maybe picked up something. And then it lasted like 3 or 4 days. It was just not great, of course. And now, even though I started feeling better earlier this week, about a week later, it's still lingering. Like the voice is not, fully back and stuff. But we don't want to talk too much about how I'm feeling. A lot has been happening in America and here at home and abroad. Of course, the war in Iran is now, going into its fourth or fifth week. And Trump gave the speech last night that everybody was anticipating. But I think people were just ended up saying it was a waste of time to even listen to it because it was just repeating things he had been saying all along. But one thing that I actually didn't realize as I was looking at the news today that Trump actually attended the Supreme Court hearing yesterday for the birthright citizenship. And that's a very rare thing. Presidents don't really usually attend oral arguments in the Supreme Court. Maybe he was trying to, gesture how important this kind of case is, where he's basically trying to reverse birthright citizenship, where if somebody's born in the United States, they're automatically a citizen. I think his administration and his perspective is he wants to push it that no, the parents have to also be citizens. But that means it would disqualify his wife, right?
his
And
wife and kids, Ahmed, as well as Rubio, the Secretary of State, and so many people. I think, I'm not sure, I listened to parts and segments of the argument, and it seemed that the judges were felt that the government was too comfortable, too unprepared, because there were instances, I can't remember which judge, but he was a male judge, and he was saying, what about Native Americans? What about Native Americans? Where do they fall in this birthright thing? And the lawyer for the government didn't know how to answer it. There
they
was
seem
another.
definitely skeptical that, the Supreme Court justices are skeptical. It's just, it seems like definitely trying to, in a way, depopulate the country of foreigners or what they consider to be foreigners, that somehow their interpretation that, America is just for a specific group of people, white Christians, and sometimes they refer to it as Judeo-Christian, that this country is founded on Judeo-Christians, which always baffles me, that whatever they say that this country is founded on Judeo-Christian foundations or, ideals, when up until 50 years ago, um, even Jewish people were persecuted, and in the United States, it was this whole idea that America is built on Judeo-Christian foundations and ideals or principles is a newer thing that has been introduced mostly by politicians.
Yes, and there was another discussion that I found quite interesting, and excuse me because I can't remember the name of the judge, but she's the African American one, Ketanji, I think.
Hmm.
And she was asking, okay, let's say there is a pregnant woman and going to the hospital and she wants to give birth. When do you want, what is the mechanism to show that the mom, the pregnant woman, has legal papers or citizenship? Like, at what point? What is the mechanism? And again, the government, obviously, lawyer wasn't really prepared and didn't know what to say, because and he tried to give some lingo that doesn't mean anything, and then she insisted, like, at what moment? And it made a lot of sense. You're giving a birth, and like, what is the mechanism? So let's say she goes to the hospital and it turns out that the mom is illegal, or has citizenship, or on a green card, or on a visitation visa. So what? They're gonna kick her out, and the baby will be delivered in the parking lot. So she was asked, and they had no answer. They had no answer.
Well,
So
I
I don't,
mean, why would that be an issue? I mean, it could be just, oh yeah, that she delivers, but the child would not be a
because of
citizen.
because if what if the mom is not a citizen? That's the whole
I
point.
mean,
That
I think the law is not to forbid them from delivering. It's that they would not recognize the child as a citizen if they're whether just because they're born in the country.
I think she was
Anyway,
trying to show them that they're not prepared to answer
yeah, of
questions.
course they're not prepared, and they're just winging a lot of this stuff. And this just I don't think they were prepared to go to bomb Iran either. That they thought they greatly underestimated Iran's capabilities. There definitely seems like somebody misled someone about how long this is going to take or would take or if it's even possible. But again, we remember that there was analysis, there were reports coming out of the military that even with the bombings, even if the United States bombs Iran and attacks it, that without having ground troops, the regime would not fall. But Trump, I guess, went along with what Netanyahu was trying to promise him, that it would be possible and it would be successful. And somehow, after decapitating the leadership, that the people would overthrow them. So, there's a lot happening in the news, especially when it comes to Iran and the direction it's going. It's obviously not going in the right direction. It seems like Trump is trying to find any way possible to end this war, but they can't really end it without looking like they lost or did not achieve their goals. So I'm not sure. It seems like his advisors, he wants to somehow end it, but he can't really find a way to end it without looking like he's lost and did not achieve their goals.
Yes, Ahmed, and the whole universe was waiting and anticipating for his speech, his statement to the nation, and I think so many people were disappointed. But I'm very pleased to tell you that Professor Mariam Jamshid is joining us now, and she's a legal scholar and writes on national security, international law, and specializes in the MENA region, which means the Middle East, the whole area, including, of course, Turkey, Cyprus, and Iran. And she's a non-resident fellow at the Quincy Institute, author, and writes about the Arab Spring. And we've had her one time. Good to have you, Professor Mariam, on the show again.
Hi, Samar. It's nice to be back. Thanks so much for inviting me to join you.
Of course, Mariam. Before we jump into really Iran, there are so many questions I want to ask you about it. But let's go to the speech that the president gave yesterday. Some people were stayed up in the Arab world. I'm very active on X, and there were people from all walks of life, from different countries of the world, anticipating and waiting to see what is it that Trump is going to say. And most people commented that he was literally reading his Truth Social feed. What
Mm.
do you think of what we witnessed last night?
I mean, I don't think it was anything very different from what he has been saying on Truth Social and in other interviews that he's been doing over the last few weeks. I mean, Donald Trump is a master of illusion and disillusion. Disillusion in the sense of, basically being a little bit deluded about what he has been able to achieve and is able to achieve as president. He certainly wants to project this notion that the United States is very much in control and is meeting all of its objectives, and that Iran is on its knees. Um, but at the same time, a confident, successful leader um, doesn't lash out and threaten his adversaries the way that Donald Trump seems to be doing. If Iran was capitulating, if Iran was, unable to defend itself, if Iran was in fact begging for a ceasefire, and there, seems to be absolutely no evidence that that's in fact the case, then why would Donald Trump need to threaten to blow Iran to the Stone Ages? Why would Donald Trump need to threaten to destroy, all of, if not most of, Iran's civilian infrastructure? These are things, as devastating as they obviously are to the populations that are impacted. These are things that a desperate president, a desperate administration, a desperate country does. Obviously, it also is an indication of a total, lack of any kind of legal, moral, or ethical principles. And of course, in that regard, the United States and Israel are very much in lockstep. But I didn't see that speech, as evidence of American power, nor have I seen really, anything that Trump has said over the last few weeks as an indication that the United States is in fact the one that's in control of this war. Instead, I think that speech and much of what we see is that despite the very real losses and devastation that Iran has experienced. And it's clear that the United States and Israel are accelerating their effort to try and, not just destroy the government, but destroy Iran as a state, that the Iranians have actually really set the tempo. And that the Iranians have, frankly, quite, I think for a lot of us miraculously, demonstrated an ability to stand up against two nuclear powers, two of the strongest and largest militaries on the planet, despite being under the most significant series of sanctions that almost any country has experienced in global history. So if there's strength on any side, if there is victory on any side, if there's a side that seems in control, it's not the American side, I would suggest. I think it's actually far more the Iranian side, at least so far, at least in terms of where we are now.
So why does he keep mentioning 2 weeks, 3 weeks, 2 weeks? Is there really a plan in place? Because I don't know if you know, but the Washington Post published yesterday almost a military plan on a plan that was presented to Trump into sending troops, ground troops, to or capture or get the uranium. And I think, and I actually see on your feed that there is a general that says these people need to stop snorting whatever they are snorting. How
Yeah.
on earth are you gonna do that? So is there really a plan and somebody is leaking it to us, or he just says these things?
I mean, that plan in particular, about this, really bizarre plan to invade deep into Iranian territory and create an airport, like a makeshift airport, like landing strip, in order to take out this uranium the location of which is unknown. And that regardless of where it's located, most estimates are that, wherever it might be, it's buried deep underground. So again, very hard to extract, even for the Iranians potentially. But this completely, harebrained plan to try and invade, create infrastructure in enemy territory, and then take out highly reactive uranium, what I assume is highly reactive uranium, out from the country is, actually, given the fact that this war has even happened, and as harebrained of a plan and as little planning as went into that, I guess it's not that surprising that they continue to come up with these totally unrealistic, and certainly doomed to failure projects to try and demonstrate some kind of success. Again, I think it goes back to this desperation to show some kind of victory, because I think they have now understood. I mean, obviously they've understood there's going to be no regime change, even though now what they have pivoted to is saying that, since it's different people, it's a different government. It's still the Islamic government of Iran. Yes, the people may be different, but it's still the same. It's the same government. Much like the governments everywhere change. This government changed its personnel, but it didn't change its fundamental ideology, its structure, its method of governance. That remains largely the same. But they've understood, despite their rhetoric, that regime change isn't going to happen. I think they've also understood that they're not going to be able to actually decimate Iran militarily. Like, who cares, honestly, if you take out the Iranian Air Force? There really was no Iranian Air Force. Iran made the decision a long time ago to focus on building missiles and not to focus on, an air force, in part because of the sanctions that they were under. The Iranian Navy, I mean, it's not the big boats that matter. It's the small little speedboats that matter. It's Iran's asymmetric power that matters militarily. And the United States and Israel are not going to be able to eliminate that. If they haven't done it yet, they're not going to be able to do it. And so, of course they've started targeting civilian infrastructure, but again, that's not really a victory,
Yeah, that's
unless they really want to say, we define victory as destroying Iran's healthcare system, even though, that's what they're doing. They
that's
need to show that
the
they've been
goal.
able to meet one of their objectives. And one of those objectives is the nuclear issue. So, if they can do this, and of course, the Venezuela intervention, and attack and the abduction of Maduro is, I think, part of what's inspiring these kinds of harebrained schemes. But if they can do it, then that looks like a victory, and then maybe they can walk away. So what will they do it? I don't know, but I'm not surprised that they've developed it, and I think it is probably real.
That's why he keeps insisting on discussing things that do not exist. Like you said, there is really not a well-placed Air Force or a navy. But what is happening also at the same time is that both Israel and the US are destroying the infrastructure in Iran. It's
Mhm.
that, like you just mentioned, the healthcare system, he's threatening to
Yeah.
destroy bridges and he says it's going to take them
Yeah.
20 years to rebuild them. Is he trying to create chaos in Iran or foment a civil uprising? And that's really their last straw to destroy the regime there.
I think even, in some ways, I'm more worried about the day after in Iran once this is over, than I am, about right now, because I think, at least in terms of the sort of internal popular situations of the population, the existence of, whatever, various sectarian groups, not sectarian groups, sorry, ethnic groups, ethnic separatist groups, obviously a population, many of which are not happy with the the government and haven't been for a long time. What might happen and how they may rise up after, all this is over is, a big question. I don't, though, and again, we have not seen, despite their best efforts, anything like that happening so far, which doesn't mean it can't happen. When we think about Syria, it took a while for the revolution to turn into a full-blown civil war. But again, Iran is not Syria, and not to say that Iran is exceptional and that Iran can't become Syria, but there are limits to analogies with other countries. So I don't even think it's really about causing an uprising right now. It might be about laying the groundwork for one later, but I think it's certainly, and that goes to this point, this whole objective of potentially laying a groundwork for later. Certainly the objective is to make it very hard for Iran to recover from this war. I think one of the most devastating strikes so far has been against the Mobarakeh steel factory in Esfahan, which was the largest steel factory in the Middle East. Iran's second largest export class was steel. And obviously, steel is very important to construction. And so to destroy, and it seems as if it has now been destroyed, it has been hit more than once. And it's not the only steel factory to be hit. Another steel factory was hit as well. To destroy this kind of domestic infrastructure, which was made, on the blood, sweat, and tears of Iranians, and going back to the 1960s, that Iran has tried to become independent in this area. To have now effectively destroyed that domestic industry will make it very hard for Iran to rebuild. Iran has also developed its own domestic pharmaceutical manufacturing industry because of sanctions. And Iran is effectively, with the exception of a few very specific kinds of drugs, was basically independent when it came to manufacturing pharmaceuticals. The Americans and the Israelis have targeted Iran's major pharmaceutical factories over the last few days. They have also hit bridges. They have started hitting bridges. They were hitting civilian airports from the very start across the country. So for sure, there is an effort to try and destroy Iran's civilian infrastructure to make it very, very hard for Iran to rebuild. And I think a part of that is also retribution for one of Iran's most notable successes since the start of this war, which is loosening the sanctions noose from around its neck. So because of its control over the Strait of Hormuz, because of the way it's been able to disrupt global oil, the United States actually temporarily removed sanctions on certain classes of Iranian oil for the first time in a long time. Iranian oil tankers, or ones closely aligned with Iran, are the only ones basically getting through the Strait of Hormuz, the last time I looked at least. And the price of oil has obviously gone up. So Iran is making more money off of its oil resources than it has in a very long time. It's also charging certain tankers moving through the Strait of Hormuz a fee of millions of dollars to pass through the strait. So, Iran has, in many ways through this war, been able to defy sanctions in a very powerful way. But at the same time, the U.S. and Israel, because they want to ensure that Iran remains both military and economically dominated, are trying to eliminate those elements of Iran's domestic resistance economy that it developed in order to be able to survive sanctions. They're trying to target and destroy that industry.
Ahmed? I'm not sure what happened to
Yeah,
Mohammed.
Miriam, thanks for joining us, and let me thank you for being on with us today. So, you're an associate professor of law, Colorado University, or University of Colorado in Boulder, but you're also a expert on the Arab Spring, on the Middle East. You're originally Persian, right? Were you born there?
No, I was born in the U.S., but yes, my I am Iranian.
Now, you consider yourself like part of the diaspora?
I mean, whether I want to or not, I am part of the diaspora. Yes.
So, can you explain some of our listeners maybe that watch the diaspora and there's just such a wide
Oh boy.
spectrum because you've got some
Yeah.
in LA and other places that are going to these protests. These are, they say
Hmm.
they're Iranian Americans and they are waving a different Iranian flag. And then,
Hmm.
a lot of times with the Israeli flag, they're calling for the Shah to come back on the rule. Who are these people and what percentage of the diaspora are they?
I mean, it's hard to really tell, and the diaspora has changed very much, both in terms of its composition, and in terms of its sort of ideological orientation over the last few years. So, when I was growing up in the 80s and 90s, most of the diaspora was made up of people who had left, right, before the revolution or around the revolution. Um, since then, especially over the last few decades, you have a lot of members of the diaspora who, have grew up in Iran. So people my age, but people who spent most of their life in Iran and then came here, in their 20s for university or for other reasons. And some members of the diaspora go back to Iran. Many do not. Many Iranians in the diaspora and also inside of Iran itself also watch certain diaspora satellite channels that have emerged over the last few years. I mean, there have been Iranian diaspora channels since I was a child. And, they have had their own political orientations. A lot of them have been cultural. But they have arguably consolidated around two kind of main outlets that a lot of Iranians, again, inside Iran as well, watch. One is Manoto, which I believe is based in Canada, and then the other one is Iran International, which is based in the UK. I believe Manoto came out. It's either based in Canada or the UK, and I believe it was established shortly after the Green Movement in 2009, and I believe Iran International was established around 2017, but don't quote me on that. Both of these channels have really dedicated themselves to pushing for the return of the Pahlavi dynasty, especially Iran International. Iran International in particular has also certainly in the past received money from the Saudis, is also very closely aligned with Israel. So you'll see a lot of, I mean, I do not watch Iran International, so I'll say this is all secondhand. But my understanding based on, academic writings of Iran International in particular is that, it very much promotes a pro-US, pro-Israel, anti-Iranian, strong anti-Iranian narrative, a lot of, again, pro-Shah narrative and a lot of nostalgia as well for the period under Reza Pahlavi's father, Mohammad Reza Shah, who was the Shah that was deposed in 1979. Like total, whitewash of what his government was actually like, which was, very brutal, a complete dictatorship that made many, if not most, Iranians socio and economically destitute. This is not to say that Iranians are completely brainwashed. I don't like that kind of narrative that like the diaspora, those inside the country are just they're victims of these outlets. I think they form their own opinions. They experience, certainly of course those inside the country also experience, the Iranian government, firsthand. Their views aren't just being shaped by these outlets, but these outlets do have quite an outsized impact. And they really have shifted, in my view, and the view of others, the kind of conversations and the tone of conversation you see coming, in particular, from the diaspora. Um, the pro-Israel things
Mm-hmm.
that we see from the Iranian diaspora and also from people inside Iran is new. I don't remember seeing anything like that when I was growing up. in the diaspora at all. Of course, pro-Pahlavi sentiment, because a lot of them had left, because they were aligned with the Shah, but nothing like the kind of pro-Israel and even pro-American, kind of very virulently warmongering pro-American, pro-sanctions narrative. That was not something I remember seeing at all growing up. That to me is very new. And that is, I think, without a doubt, at least in large part, a result of the kinds of narratives that are being pushed out by these outlets. And so that, I think, is something notable. And also, something that's also quite shocking and very scary is, and this goes back at least to 2022 when the woman life freedom movement was um, very much alive inside Iran, with support from the diaspora, is that you start to see a very violent and very aggressive strain to the diaspora conversations around Iran, with those who were, sort of perceived, I would say, almost entirely wrongly as being somehow pro regime, as they would say, receiving death threats, receiving all kinds of vile messages, being treated in really horrible ways, being doxxed. That also, which is not to say that our diaspora has ever been perfect or that it's ever been, super peaceful or respectful of differing opinions. It has not been, but the level of kind of violent rhetoric and threats has also escalated over the last few years. And I think that also has something to do with the kind of coverage and sentiments that are coming out of some of these Iranian satellite networks. So the diaspora is incredibly fractured. Inside Iran, there's a lot of fracture. There are a lot of different reasons for that. But I would say that, these networks do play a large role.
Now, you're critical of the U.S. government and bombing and the war in Iran, but you don't strike me as somebody who is pro-regime.
I mean, I'm not, from my perspective, what we're talking about right now is the survival of Iran as a nation state. And that's what's on the menu. Will Iran survive as a nation state or not? From my perspective, as a legal scholar, unless you have a sovereign, independent state, you cannot really have meaningful self-determination for its people. Which is not to say that the sovereignty of a state necessarily means that its people will be able to choose the political system they want. They will be able to, have, autonomy when it comes to their economic, social, and cultural future. It's not sufficient to achieve those things, but it's necessary. So for as long as Iran's ability to be sovereign, for as long as that's under threat, I don't know how we talk about the future of Iran internally. We need to ensure that Iran is able to actually exist as a nation state within the nation state system. It's able to be independent. It's able to set its own domestic policy before we can start talking about, do we want a democracy? What kind of political system do we want? There certainly needs to be change inside Iran. I mean, from an economic standpoint, from a political standpoint, things have gotten to a point where so many people are living under very, very serious daily pressure, and, certainly, the government itself has a lot to answer for. But at the same time, Iran's domestic situation, as much as the 1979 revolution was able to eliminate direct American control over Iran's affairs, because the Shah and the United States were very close. As much as the 79 revolution was able to do that, it was not able to stop the United States, Israel, other Western powers from constraining Iranian sovereignty through external action. And so a lot of what
Ahmed,
a lot of that pressure is because of the sanctions itself, right?
my co-host, interrupt for a second because, sorry, Mariam and Ahmed, to interrupt like this, but just now, Trump posted on Truth Social an image of a huge explosion on a very big bridge, and I'm quoting. He's saying the biggest bridge in Iran comes tumbling down, never to be used again, much more to follow. It is time, and this is capital letter now, it is time for Iran to make a deal before it is
Yeah.
too late. And there is nothing
Yeah.
left what still could become a great country. What is I have a feeling, Mariam, he wants to force the Iranians to make a deal. So he comes out and he says, I made a deal and end the war. Is that correct? It just happened now, Ahmed. Sorry, that's why I interrupted.
No
I mean, I would
problem.
say so. I mean, I obviously have not seen this because, we're online, but yeah, I mean, I think the Iran is not, what the Iranians have been saying is that we are not negotiating directly with them. There are intermediaries who are trying to, create the framework of negotiations, but we're not in direct conversation with the Americans, and we do not want to negotiate until we've been able to achieve our goals. And Iran's goal is to basically prevent any kind of aggression again from happening against the country. We can talk about whether or not that's realistic, but after June, a determination was made or there was a lot of feeling within the Iranian establishment that they agreed too quickly to a ceasefire. And the expectation very quickly after that was that there would be another war. And of course, there has been. So Iran doesn't want to move forward with another ceasefire when there's a shadow of imminent future war upon it. So, so they're not engaging, and it would seem that Donald Trump's tweets reflect that they're not really engaging in any kind of negotiation with the United States. The United States wants to be done with this. Oil prices are increasing. They're going up and up and up. And, and there are more and more troops heading to the region. The United States is also losing options when it comes to the military perspective. Sure, they can keep hitting bridges and civilian infrastructure, but from a military standpoint, from a military target standpoint, they don't have a lot of options left. They've kind of hit what they can hit. So, the civilian infrastructure is what's left. And so, of course, they're hitting it, hoping that they can finally break the Iranian government's will. And, it looks like this tweet is just another indication of that.
This is actually, I'm looking at the post that he made, and it's basically, if you look at Mariam Jamshidi's Twitter account, she posted about this 4 hours ago, or reposted, and it's a bridge that's in Karaj,
I see
Iran.
It now. Yes, yeah.
The B1 bridge.
Yeah, it was the tallest bridge. I don't know if it was the biggest bridge, but it was one of Iran's tallest bridges, and I believe it was actually under construction.
Oh, it's like a suspension bridge, but
yeah,
again, like you're saying, it's showing signs of desperation and contradictions. Because if one hand, if you, eviscerated and destroyed and whatever other words that they use to say about how he's completely wiped out Iran, then why do you need to have these desperate measures to try to force them and pressure them to negotiate?
I mean, and they're clearly
things are not going well according to his plan.
Yeah, I mean, they're clearly also trying to hit, targets, symbols of Iran's sort of infrastructural strength, like companies and infrastructure that Iranians identify with in a very personal way.
Iconic symbolic
iconic
things.
Sites, right? So the Mobarakia steel plant, I mean, I have seen so many people so emotional about the hitting of that steel factory, which probably seems weird, right? Why would a population get so emotional over striking a steel factory? But like I said, that steel factory was the product of decades of blood, sweat, and tears of Iranians. There was pride in those steel factories. There was pride in the oil facilities that were created in the South Pars gas field in Abadan. People's parents built those factories. This bridge, apparently, and I'm looking at the tweet now as well, was set to become the tallest bridge in the Middle East and was a source of pride for Iranian engineers that they'd been able to do this.
I
There
can
are
see that
plenty
on
of
top of the bridge, it has the cranes still there.
yeah,
So
they were
it's
still in the process of building. The thing is, like, this was meant to be an alternative route. So it looks like it was meant to turn what would be in a 1 hour journey into a 10-minute journey. So, this is exactly going to, put the brakes on the ability of Iranians to travel, in and around Tehran. They'll still be able to do it. Of course, the area is notorious for horrible traffic, but that's not the point, right? The point is to strike at something, at a symbol, right, of Iranian strength and
it's almost
independence. And
like
so,
not to make it as a comparison, just like on the attacks of 9/11, it was a symbolic attack on
yeah,
American
power.
power, finance,
Yes.
banking. So I'm sure none of these things are going to actually turn the people of
No,
Iran to the
they
side of the
won't.
United States and for regime change? Or are they thinking that by hitting so much of the infrastructure, that will eventually get the people to rise up against their leadership? Or it seems like it's having the other effect, because I'm
Yeah.
actually seeing some people in the diaspora and others that are actually apologizing and saying they regret
Yeah.
ever supporting regime change. I don't know if you've seen the same thing.
Yeah, yeah, I have. There are a bunch of people who have come out who are pro Pahlavi, pro regime change, pro war, that have been traumatized. I mean, it's shocking that they're shocked, but, that have been traumatized by the fact that, this, wasn't just about decapitating Iranian officials or hitting military bases. Again, utterly naive that they thought that that's what it would be about. These. I think, again, I also think it's naive for the Americans or the Israelis to believe that Iranians are going to rise up, not only because so many of them are, many of them are horrified by what's happening, but also because, there has been a rallying around the flag, like this government does have a base, and that base has come out very strongly over the last few weeks. I mean, there are videos after videos of massive rallies, some of which have happened as bombs have been falling on the country. People waving their flags and not moving as those bombs are falling. And it's not
Mm.
just the base that's coming out to those videos. If we can, take some of the content coming out of the country at face value, and it does, seem real. There are people who they will interview who will say things like, I was, for example, protesting in January against the government, but now I'm here, protesting in support of it because our country, is being attacked, in an unprovoked and illegal war that is hitting everywhere. Central and Western Iran have been under constant bombardment for the last month. I mean, again, are we surprised that the population of a country, regardless of what many of them feel about the government, are going to come out and support and want to defend their country? Like, why is
Right. I
that
mean,
surprising to
as
anybody?
as far as like if it was here in the United States, half the people dislike Trump or more. Maybe now it's actually a majority of Americans. They're against him. But if a foreign government starts bombing America, they're not going to be, oh, hey, this is Trump's fault. They're going to be against whoever is bombing America.
Yeah.
But we don't have a lot of time left. Trump last night in selling in his speech, if you want to call it that, to try to justify the war in Iran, he said that 45,000, that the Iranian regime has killed 45,000 of its own people, and somehow that's one of the reasons why the U.S. is attacking Iran. Is that number accurate? And do you think that that's the reason, one of the reasons Trump and Israel are, going after Iran and bombing them?
Yeah, I mean, those numbers are wild and they have never been verified. So again, going back to these media outlets in the diaspora, I think it was a day or two after what seemed to have been the bloodiest days of those protests, which I believe were January 8th and 9th, something like January 10th or 11th. Iran International came out and said, oh, we've confirmed 12,000 people were killed. This is an impossible thing to do. First of all, the country was under a complete internet blackout by that point. Second of all, to be able to verify those kinds of numbers takes far more time than a day, But that's where it starts. It starts with Iran International saying 12,000. And then all of a sudden there's this Iranian doctor in Germany who claims to have a network of, I think he's an eye surgeon, who claims to have a network of doctors inside of Iran. And he gives some interview to some Western news outlet, I think in Europe initially, saying, oh, yeah, according to my doctors, again, an informal group of doctors that aren't, could not possibly have the forensic capacity to be able to confirm these kinds of numbers, 30,000 people were killed. And then I don't even know where the 40,000 number or the 45,000 number come from. And you have all these media outlets that start laundering these numbers. You have, I think it was The Independent in the UK. You have certain journalists like Roxana Saberi, who has her own set of grievances against the government. She in particular went around repeating these numbers in different articles that she did. One was for Time Magazine. She did interviews with CBS News. CBS News, of course, now owned by Paramount, run by Barry Weiss, very much pushing a pro-Israel agenda, also starts laundering 30,000 people were killed. Unfortunately, prominent Iranian academics who, again, have their own beef with the government, like Payam Akhavan, who is an Iranian-Canadian international lawyer, starts laundering these very huge numbers in front of the United Nations, again, unverified, based largely on so-called, claims that were at least originally communicated secondhand by this eye surgeon in Iran about these tens of thousands of numbers. The only organization I'm aware of, at least outside of Iran, that has tried to verify these numbers, it's an Iranian diaspora organization, I believe, based in DC, has put the numbers, the latest figures they have are around 7,000, with about 10,000 cases that they have not been able to verify yet. They also moved quite quickly, but their numbers haven't moved very much over the last few weeks. So by early February or late January, they had the numbers around the 6,000s. And, again, since then, they haven't moved up very much. That could be because of the war. That could be because of a lot of different things. But again, they have done the most in trying to verify these numbers, and they are far smaller, which is not to say that 6,000 or 7,000 is nothing. Those are staggering numbers, Even, one death is too many. One death of a protester is too many. But, these 30,000, 40,000 figures have absolutely no basis in verified fact. And frankly, it doesn't seem like anyone even cares anymore. They just go around repeating these figures and everyone considers them fact at this point. It's really shocking. Was it the reason why the US and Israel entered this? Absolutely not. But was it a kind of justification, a way of legitimizing this? Certainly a way of getting many Iranians who bought into these numbers to support this inside and outside the country? Absolutely.
Mariam, we're running out of time. We have 1 minute left, and we have Pat who sent us an email asking, what is the percentage of people leaving Iran who are Jewish Iranians? If you can answer in 1 minute. And are there Iranians leaving the country?
So you mean Iranians in Iran who are Jewish?
Are Jewish and are fleeing the country or leaving the country?
I have no idea about the statistics.
I don't think many
inside the country who are living. I mean, what I know is that I believe Iran still has the largest Jewish community inside the Middle East outside of Israel. And that, from what I have seen about the Iranian Jewish community, they are just as against this war as other communities inside the country.
I want to thank you, Mariam, for being on True Talk. Maybe you'll come one more time. Thank you so much.
We need to have her on again.
Inshallah.
Yes. Thank you, Mariam.
Inshallah. Thanks so much, Mariam.
Inshallah. Thank you so much. Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye. Samar, we're out of time. So the scoop is next. Have a great weekend, everyone, and stay safe. And that's it.
The
ده
video.
بيعملها في تامبا.